now it's, let's try this out. Drop frames 0%. Where is this streaming to? Try to. Okay. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and think I got it working this time. All right. So I just went through 20 minutes and that's some time wasted, but that's okay. All right. So I'm toying around with this new format of sharing some of the more intimate moments of coding, especially when the level of difficulty is high, especially because sharing things as you bring it together is often going to be much more interesting and beneficial to other people in software. So this is something that will be interesting for anybody that is trying to CTO a software business, anybody that's trying to just go deeper with orchestration, or anybody that's just trying to see what an end-to-end software system looks like. And there's just so many different areas where I'm just executing these days. And I suppose adding to the level of interesting is not as though I'm just like hacking this for the first time. This is months and months or years of prep, that's kind of coming together. So I think that those moments tend to be what people want to see. And so in particular today, to dive into the problems being worked on by going backwards, is taking, for instance, this diagram, hopefully this time around, of streaming without failure, fingers crossed. There will be more efficiency since I have all the tabs opened. So this product, Service Cloud by SaaSworks, allows you to hit one API and access a handful of different types of services. That could be like for email, you'd hit like SendGrid, or authentication, maybe like AWS Cognito, for instance. And the idea being of this type of architecture is a microservice architecture, which I won't even get into since there's other ground to cover, but feel free to go look that up. And the idea here is that all this lives inside of a single gateway and then proxies out requests, which we'll cover in the next diagram here. So what that looks like here is something like this. So you have your API request, which maybe initiates from a front end or from a server context to this API, which then calls a single gateway address, which then has an internal host or path resolution. So that, for instance, port 3000 maybe forwards to this server, or I'm sorry, I said that in reverse. So that scheduling and anything under that path forwards to port 3000, or scheduling.business.com forwards to port 3000. 3001, or sorry, billing or billing.business.com would forward to port 3001. So this type of architecture is fairly pervasive. And then in a bigger picture, that kind of lives in something that looks like this. So as the request comes in, it does route DNS resolution. This is Route 53, Amazon's DNS. Hits the gateway, does some fancy load balancing, and then hits the respective servers. You don't need to really bother with this other stuff on the sides here. But the other main use case, which is why I think I popped open this diagram, is Localproxine. So in today's session, the other main use case So the main objective right now from a product point of view to accomplish is that inside of this front end right here, we want the user story satisfied so that from the front end, you can hit this API and let's say author an email, or maybe it's like a customer database and you want to add a new user into that database or collect a payment. And so some of this is out of scope in terms of like it's not going to happen in 2 hours of coding. But to give it for instance of what I've been running on, which I'll go to in a second. I think I meant to go here. So I've been building front ends now for probably the last, I don't know, 2 months. Just because I'm probably about 6 months into a build and just product has to get out the door. But I've been running on the constraint of not having backend set up. So I've been relying on stuff like, for instance, using Google Forms embeds, so that you can do some like Zapier when the person puts their email address in, it would send some trigger and then I could do something about it. Or for instance, with this chat box, I didn't want to pay for intercom, which is like $60 a month. So I have this instead going to Calendly. And again, like same concept. It's like, it's just operating with the constraint of no backend is hard. And I don't even necessarily need to see those backends done. I think actually there's some pretty interesting stuff you can do just running with using external services to, for instance, do some of that backend fulfillment. You can, in Google Forms, you can do pre-filled form links. So you could, in your front end code, set up a single form like I'm going to do on my own portfolio website. So if you like wanted to talk to me about JavaScript, it's all going to point at the same form. You'll just be hitting like if you hit the button in the JavaScript section, it's just going to be hitting a pre-filled form. But nonetheless, it's still pretty painful to not have access to all this backend. So the unit of work today is to get at this picture right here. So we want to be able to hit that gateway, and we want to be able to then path out to the respective service. So, and that's one part. Another piece is this idea of the local proxy, which for the moment I've been accomplishing with NGrok. And so NGrok is a tool that looks something like this. So you run a command where you basically say NGrok host my local port, and then you can specify a host name that you're going to host it on. So when I hit enter on that, it now informs us that you can access my locally, my locally run web server now is accessible over DNS. So this is something that's been useful because I think there's two main use cases. So one is mobile testing. It just sometimes, like, you can use Chrome Inspect and you can get the mobile emulation, but it just sometimes is no replacement for the actual phone. So that's been helpful, but also you can just share these types of links with colleagues. And the other idea I had, since I think when it comes to orchestrating, again, like this service of backend ecosystems and having everything be tested and live, you want, and you want it to always be, doing some kind of automated push from Git to go online. I mean, this is just super complicated stuff. There's a lot of different ways you can go about doing it. A lot of the techniques end up being the same, but where it gets very interesting is in the tactics that you have to take in order to get to the live product. And so in the case of like NGrok, hold on. in the case of NGrok, my microphone died for a second. In the case of NGrok, um, that is just relying on something called SSH tunnels. And so you can actually run your own NGrok, and I haven't fully explored. I have a ticket open. Go look at ClickUp. um, Again, I think for a lot of people, you know, it's probably just interesting to see how other people organize large technical projects. Here, SSHD server. That's probably what we want. So NGrok is a class of tools that basically allows you to create a tunnel between you and another computer. So that kind of creates a direct connection between two computers, and that way you aren't reliant on routing tables through your router or your ISP, and you're not reliant on, let's say, different security protocols to some extent within networks. And again, like one use case of, and I haven't fully explored, I have an exploratory ticket open to, effectively replicate this work of what NGrok does. But for the moment, NGrok really achieves, a bit of value by having this locally accessible link, or sorry, this internet accessible link for a local web server. But it's a class of tools that you'd think of as SSH tunnels. And I think a lot of people tend to understand SSH tunnels if you've ever tried to spin up an RDS instance or like a MySQL on Amazon, and you quickly learn you have to connect to your RDS through a Bastion host. And a Bastion host really is just an SSH tunnel, or it's an SSH session, which, depending, I have run it as a tunnel before to do local testing, so I could talk to MySQL and run tests locally, or just run, CRUD, or sorry, not CRUD, just run things against RDS. But you quickly learn in this use case. So this is basically circumventing some of the network security, because you're taking, so RDS lives behind a VPN, and you're basically taking an EC2 instance that is also inside that VPN, and then you're running commands via SSH from that EC2 host. So I believe it's something like when you run a tunnel, you're able to achieve the effect of like making the connection that the Bastion host has to RDS as though it's on your local machine. But that's the class of tools known as tunnels. And so whether it's for, protecting network security, like with the Bastion host, or if it's just for like easing your workflow, that's where their utility comes in, and they're on this chart here because they have that utility. So that's another piece of the pie. And then the last piece of the pie, well, is maybe pie is the wrong metaphor. So the work being done today is essentially to do some of this table storage of what servers on what port. And I think that the poor man's approach, or the low tech approach to this, is to assign every one of your microservices to a constant or a fixed port. Then you have a lookup table where the email service is on port 3001, for instance, and it never changes. And then from a front end context, if we go back to, I guess it's this diagram is fine. So front end context, you would have probably a wrapper around an asynchronous HTTP request library, like I will be using Axios. And that library would do a lookup on probably its own server to get the listing of what services are on what ports. And that could just be in the simplest case that it's grabbing a flat file that again, tells you that your email service is on port 3002. And so then, with some cross origin, I don't know, I'd have to go back and read up on cross origin for ports. But presumably, you'd then just run the request directly to this port. And that's how you can get away with not having to have a gateway initially, which is a little bit more work. The other part about it is that having the gateway, you kind of need all that table lookup anyway. So the midpoint, which is between having a flat file where everything's always the same and then having something that's more dynamic, where let's say your server just finds whatever port is available, you still need this table because the gateway, I have just found through experience, you want multiple levels of redundancy. So, because the gateway that's your uptime, and your uptime is a critical metric, and you don't want. There's just too many things that I have found, and I think in the last attempt I made to stream this video. So, like for instance, if we go back to this NGrok example, why not in theory just write a script that and even though like we're talking about the context of local tunnels, but in theory, bringing your servers online, you could just write one script that brings everything online. So why not just write that script? And the answer is that these might be your 10 services today, but if you want to change it tomorrow, and I think more than many developers that do what I do, I obsess over having less of these manual steps or even these hard-coded defined steps, and instead, because you want to have some level of smart automation, because if you don't do that, at the very least, you have a big O time that's constant. You're just adding that many more steps to get your product out the door. But in the worst case, you're adding some kind of like factorial time where every step that you add services, and then maybe if it's like multiple levels of depth, that's where you get into n factorial hell. So it's usually somewhere between that, but at the very least you're making your life more complicated when it comes to this kind of stuff. Which, if you have a full-fledged team of people and you're just happy being in the land of code, that works. But if you're trying to run a customer-facing business, it does not work. You need the automation. So okay, that's kind of the case of like, again, like with this stuff, you start, I think, with like a flat file. Today, gonna go over building some tests on what is referred to in the system as the server cache, which is basically like a shared flat file that gets like file locking done on it, that all the servers write to when they go online or have a status change. And I think I will write some tests there and then back out of it, and then probably probably will look at having some, relying on another mechanism that I already have to do a constant based port lookup. Um, but I don't, yeah, I don't fully know the plan with that. But then on the other side of this is to have, there's a hook when the server comes online, has a status change, that we can run this equivalent code right here in a sort of declarative way. So this portion right here will be declarative. So it will look something like, so if we go right here, so I'd have section in here, call it like Microcloud, and call it I don't know if it'd be called DNS. It'd be like domains. And let's see if that follows. I mean, having the period there might break this. In other words, you might not be able to do micwit.com. That does weird things with DNS to have certificate issues and so forth, from my experience. So then maybe they'd be separate. It'd be like, I don't know. Let's see. It could just take, we could just have it. No, wait, we want it like this. Something like that, right? So the idea is that when the server comes online, it is just going to run the equivalent of this command. All right, so go back into here. So that was like 20 minutes, probably. It took me 20 minutes last time. Let's see where the stream is at. It's at about 20 minutes. It took me about 20 minutes last time to stage and talk through all of that. Here's here's the objective. That's how complicated this stuff can unfortunately be. And in my experience, it's just what keeps you sane, honestly. All right, so I kind of mentioned having self-healing and so forth, and the reason is that if you go back to like probably this diagram, I mean, there's all kinds of different contexts I have found. For instance, like your flat file schema of having all of these have a flat, a fixed port starts to break down when you want to have like green blue deployments. I'm not going to get into what that means. Go Google it. Also starts to break down when you have to have a sense of like different layers of redundancy and self-healing, meaning that you're just checking on state, double checking it at every layer and trying to repair a broken state. And you're doing that just because there's so many different contexts. There could be an OS process that fails. You could have a server that's booted up by a completely separate system. And so anyway, if I go and try to look at server status, that didn't really pop up anything. So instead, navigate to probably this guy. Right, so if I save that, it's odd. Let's see if I can figure out where it's storing it. I don't know if that's a bug or not, but this is kind of what the cache file looks like. So the idea is that when the server goes online, it stores, this is the working directory of where that server has started from, the ports that it's hosting on, its status, which I used to store an offline status, but now I just try to remove it from the cache. When it first went online, its process ID, its parent process ID, which is important because sometimes your process that is the command initially called is not what actually is running the server. So that's relevant. This is weird. I don't see how that's this. I don't see how this is correct, but this is also again. So like right now, for instance, so a couple things that were noticed. So first of all, there's two server status caches. I have no idea which one is correct. So the only way to do that and go figure that out is to go look at the code. So it's the server status, and then I wrap it in this write status. Okay, so it changes into this directory, which means that it should be in this server cache folder, which is denoted by right here. So why it's blank, I don't fully know, because there is a server online right here. So if I just, let's go find where the heck that message is coming from. This is earlier testing. All right, so the idea, and then this guy should, I guess it's already not working. Yeah, that makes sense almost. So I was trying to write, I guess, there's new error messages that weren't there before I was working on this. All right. So I assume with the streaming software, it's almost like double the boot time. So now, all right. So now it's deposited. Sometimes it can be touchy to save these files just for formatting's sake, and I don't know any other way. But anyway, so yeah, now it's again storing the information that's desired, and whatever other, this file is completely just never even getting written to. So yeah, this is reflective of the information. So with the goal with the testing, going back here, this is just have different weird bad use cases, and a lot of it is testing this invalidate function, which if we go to invalidate, you can read the docs. It's basically, so okay, so if we go to the status right here, so there's a couple things going on. There's the current working directory from where the server is coming from, there's the PID, there's the port. Those are the three main things. So general, this function ensures cache is synced up with the health check endpoints. So on, this is a common DevOps stuff, on that server that was just started is this health check endpoint. So My microphone died again. So this health check endpoint basically provides all of the information that should be in the cache. Again, right here. Except here, it's stored in memory of the server. So the idea with this particular, again, it seems like crazy redundant, but when it comes to having processes, and the one other system I omitted is like, for instance, where was it? So when I'm going to be running PM2 for process management in this system, and so you're kind of abstracting process management. Let's call it like a poor man's Kubernetes or something. At the point that you don't really know how your services are, your services, let's say, are being run in the cloud. And so that's already, you'd have to remote into some box to figure out what's going on from a command line. And then you then further abstract it into like some process manager software, start adding in all kinds of other weird ideas and edge cases, and just having this kind of level of redundancy is important. So basically says, so I think the invalidation function allows you to specify something to test against. Here it's just saying like if the CWD doesn't exist. I'm trying to see what this function's actually doing. So the health check endpoint, or sorry, the invalidate function basically has the net result of it either takes a server offline or it goes online. So that's all what this cares about. It either goes online or goes offline. That's it. that's the only function of what's being worked on today. But that is just, let's kick out of news. That is hugely important for solving this, because what we want is rather than to go be like, I'm probably going to, no, this is probably so close to working anyway, might as well just push it across the line. But this allows for dynamic identification of what service is on what port. If you have that, then you make that API endpoint available on all servers. You still should have a gateway because of DNS, but for the moment, because of NGrok fulfilling DNS, it'll work. All right. And you always look for shortcuts like that when you're trying to orchestrate a massive amount of complexity. So going into here, there's a couple tests already. In this particular test, I had to create an entirely new test API to start an external server. And the idea is that this is a valid external server. Just run this test. I don't recall offhand. So let's try to see what we can do with this. So probably now run. Just gonna run this test. With the idea is self-heal an existing PID with a server hosting a different CWD. So what we're probably going to do here is we're going to take the status information, and then we're going to artificially, I'm pretty sure the status of this, I don't recall what that outputs, but the status of this should be like that health check endpoint. And then we're going to jam it into a place in the cache that it's not supposed to go. We're going to run the invalidate function, and we're going to test the invalidate function. Not only that it will do what it's supposed to. So that's the test. And I might even just combine out of laziness these two tests into one. We'll see. What? Keep a random. Okay. Could be this. It's just this helper function basically is listening to that cache change. So this is one touch point of the work today. So it's basically inside here. And all right, so this should have dumped the information. And then the other touch point, I started this NGrok class, which it successfully listens for the cache change. So a server has come online or gone offline. But what we want to know out of this, it's like, you know, is it possible? What we want to know is we ideally just want to know what server has just come online when this triggers. This triggers, go back to here, when this server cache, so if I search server status change, so that happens all in here. And I'm pretty darn sure, where was it? Here. Why that? I guess it's right here. Anyway, there's a couple questions to wrestle with here. Okay. Read server cache. That's just okay. Here, this is what the server cache output looks like. Which I don't even know if that's right. Because there should be 2 servers online at that point. Let's see. Server cache. Okay. So this is supposed to just get whatever's sitting in the cache. So I guess it's a little bit concerning that, so this server should be online right here. So this is the first server that gets brought online from this line right here. It says start server. This is the seed server. And then down here, it's starting this external server. And then we see that happen here. Down at the bottom, this is that shared server. That's going online. And then that's when it tells us the status of it, which is like fine. But then the weird part is, alright, so if we remove that, somewhere in the quality library. So these log messages tell me what package the log is coming from, and then what error level. Server helpers. So it's basically dropping some kind of console info. Could be that, yeah, could be that this was just run before I had a chance to delete that. That could be, that's what that is. So yeah, but the fact that it's returning a server cache from the file system, that just seems like that's just not good. And you can see the error message here. It's basically saying it's trying to bring a server offline before it goes offline, but it doesn't find it in the cache anymore. So it's up with a lot of weird issues regarding cache writes. Read cache key with no merge. Cache key. So a lot of people run debuggers on stuff like this, and maybe that would help, but I mean, this is when you're dealing with asynchronous processes all writing to one file. That's what this is. I don't know how much debugging helps or does not help. Alright. Just look for write server cache calls. And so I think we should expect there's the go online version of that, and then here's the go offline. Great. And so that is really here. So what is for sure saying? Server cache. I'm just going to rerun it. Because what we want to see is that, oh shit. We want to see that this cache, that in fact has that first server's value. Add this to the, oops, that's not really relevant. Not really relevant. Existent. This could maybe be a culprit. And otherwise, do like this. This is taking a weirdly long time. There's the first server. Guess I'm okay if that's the answer. Although this server is still online, so it's like that's why this stuff needs to be tested. Again, asynchronous processes with a lot of different, too many different. I think my rule of thumb is that when you have too many different input variables, like you can't unit test your way to glory. You just have to have a crap ton of redundancy built in. You know, you're on defense almost from things breaking. Yeah, that's worrying. Current cache. But then what's also weird, so it gets here, it says current cache. Let me quit out of that. Because yeah, weirdness would be that the process started again before I had added this in. But if I go up, wherever it said the thing, but that's still not, it's just not, that is just not. Let me double check what server. What's the Microservice? I don't even know if that looks correct. Man. Has all the tests in it. Sometimes with these things, yeah, I mean this is kind of the line we want to see. But what's concerning to me is that it's supposed to be in the test server directory, which is an error that if you say start server, that's so bad. I mean, it's not, I see what it's, this is just not correct. And it's just more like I implement it incorrectly. So there's this setup file system function, and the assumption baked in there. Here, well, okay, well, right, so that line needs to go, but also start server. Yep. Name. So here, this is digging into just the quality assurance libraries for a second, just because like it's fine that it's running a server here. Sometimes I do. Oh man. Again, this is why you build in like multiple layers of redundancy. So, but that's, you always look for like something going on that's like this, because that's not what it's supposed to be. So if we go here, we look at how test servers are indexed. I don't know why this is not by name. That's the odd part to me, but that's okay. Figure that out. Oops. Here, test folders right here. Learned the hard way that having a dot folder as your default is not the way to go. Alright, so this let's see. And, you know, for one, you know, one thing, which in this case is like, is it shared server global cache state file, and you go into something like this, and you're like, oh, okay, I need to change something here. You know, you want to, a lot of ways you think about it, but you just want to, you maybe think about it like, I don't want to introduce any code that would break whatever test covers this. So you have to be like sneaky. Clearly, I was under the false assumption that you could just pass in what server you wanted to start by name, and which, for reference of what that means, you're just referencing folders underneath. It's just, it, you know, you're referencing folders in your test. That's how that's hooked up. It's a pattern. It's nothing. It's set in stone or structure. You know, it's not set up or organized that way out of necessity. So this is like, another pattern I use. Sometimes instead of having like sprawling, you know, multi-thousand line code files, I combine classes together. So out of that, you can assume that this context has access to the file system helpers. So you can say and then I believe it would be like this. Yep. Save, sure. And down here, again, just not to break tests. It's the main name of the game. And what you can do is then say to do And that will probably, so now we go back, we test this change. And again, this fixes the assumption, meaning the assumption here was start the seed server. Since then we saw the evidence that that assumption was false because it produced a cache result here, and we kind of saw it as well here. But we really wanted this to say something like seed server or whatever. And then the other thing going on here that I'm guessing is going on. So there's, when I wrote the cache, it is written for file system optimization. So what it's doing is it's basically saying, it's just a theory, I don't know, but yeah, no, that's probably not what it is either. All right, so now, hold on. We're still booting up. No, I don't quite know why. It just seems like it just nukes the cache. So, all right. Okay, so yeah, so that just fixed it. So now it has the seed package, and I don't think that this will fix anything. But sometimes with testing, that's why this stuff takes an obnoxiously long time for something that's like so trivial. But again, it's like you're increasing through this work, it's increasing the reliability of that global server cache state file. Sorry, that global server state file. And you can be reliant on that to again just remind, it's all about building this service mesh, which relies on knowing what port to access a service on. Man, that's weird. I mean, I guess I get what's going on here. But all the time, you just fix tiny little bugs. And you push your software to do weird things. All right, so again, then we'll probably see the error down here. So the point that it writes this share test, it no longer has. Parent cache, share test, problem. Huh. All right. Whew, this is a doozy. All right. So current cache. And I should say that this functionality really isn't important to a web server being online. It's just what it is important for is just looking up reliably that server. I mean, it's not as though any of these servers are coming down. Let's see what we got. Okay. It's more just the state of them is being improperly managed. Alright, so this is saying, and then we should have no clean. That's good. Then we have this weirdness. So I figure, let's remove that. See what happens. Because I had that theory that this line, but non-existent CWDs, that's so bizarre. So the last time we see, where is it? Here. Could be when it goes to start the external server, that it deletes the seed package. So sometimes, you know, again, it's like sometimes when you test, a frustrating thing could be setting up a test environment has nothing to do with your actual production environment, but you usually benefited to get it to work in such an environment because you're reliably, you know, you can rely that whatever's actually run in code. Well, let's now check. Hold on. So seed is still there. That's frustrating. Let's temporarily try to get a snapshot. So the seed is still there. What the hell? Okay. So I just refreshed this before. So somehow it nuked the server status file before it even ran the script. So that's pretty weird. So that's not the culprit. And who cares about that for the moment? Or that. Or that. This could also be an issue, is that somewhere in the process of some code. So the only reason, by the way, that this says false is because it's a chokedar, which is like a file watcher, and it's detecting that a file was deleted. And the reason it says false is because it's trying to do a readable printout of where the route was deleted, what package. Because the entire package directory is deleted, it reads as false. Not in the edge case I care much about it. Crap. Well. Let's see how long I've been streaming for. This is about an hour and 5 minutes. So I refuse to stop streaming until there's some demonstrable progress. So the idea is that do something weird here. Existing cache. this is trying to preserve. So if you drop into a test environment, that you preserve the I don't even know the effectiveness of this, but you're preserving the state of servers, so that you can restore it before you exit. What is good is that there's this read server cache function. My concern, another thing that I've seen sometimes in this system can get kind of weird. I don't think any of this really matters much, but sometimes it can do some weird merging. Possibly it's worth shedding. Let's see. So one of the worries I have is it's not gonna matter. Yeah, somewhere. All right, so there's it's not that many options. So one option. One option is the new process starts up. It hits this particular block right here. I'm sure this exists elsewhere. It's an initialization block. So it's only in this file. So it's here as well. Red. Yep, we want that. It doesn't matter. The worry would have been, I think that this is fine. The worry would have been, because so long as this read gets called, I think even once before a write, which seems guaranteed here, unless no read is called, which I think because that search seems to say that it's never called without no read. It's always reading the cache before it writes. So that okay, so that indicates, okay, first of all, what? So this is the entire reason for having this type of stuff, because like sometimes when I see weird messages like this, it's indicating to me that some process is dangling somewhere, and it's pretty annoying. And an example of how we could like go and check it, so I don't know if here, right? We can check health endpoints. So apparently there's a health endpoint, but it doesn't have other information on it, which is weird. This one has one. That one does not. So like, I have a specific command that I came up with just for this edge case. And I just sometimes think that this is, again, you could root out one vector of reasons why this is some dangling process. You could find out it's like tied only to, running tests, for instance, where you're routinely bringing up servers, taking them down. So it's like kind of a lost cause type of bug to try to solve for. It is pretty frustrating though, because if I have to remember, then why is that not showing other information? That's also really, really weird. Why is the health check endpoint? Let me see what's even in that API endpoint. Health. Really weird that I guess the state. Oops. So let's get rid of that. So I think one of the reasons to live stream this is because this is not a fun problem at all. To get into like this level of weeds for such little gain, and like we're seeing a bunch of different stuff just like throw in the console as we're doing this. It's really frustrating. And it's like clearly and evidently showing areas that the software just clearly just stops working or breaks. Like the fact that a health check endpoint can somehow like lose. Clearly it's tied to this server.instance.state, and somehow that state, I'm sure it's like tied to this process. And so you start to look at this and you wonder like, what are the answers? Look like, why is it doing this? I mean, this is not that hard of a problem. You bring a server online, you write to a file with a file lock. Now maybe the server crashes unexpectedly, and now you have just a cache entry that's not supposed to be there. And now you just have a invalidation function that tries to take it out of the cache because it's not representing anything true. Right? That's one option. Here, so if we go to the system status again, hit save. There's our seed. This is another test that's about to come through, just to see if on starting the external process, if this cache is read this way. Right, so one potential is that there's and so on startup it's saying that there's nothing. So that indicates that it's not like probably not a cache invalidation issue. I can go check and see if this calls anything. So just saying watch the cache file. So check if this. This could be problematic. This could be what's going on. Even the right file system cache. Yes. Nope. Ooh. Yep. This could be it. So this is just probably a poor test. Conditional statement, I mean. So this really probably needs to be read like if fs exists sync cache file. And I would bet that's going to fix the error. So we know this because super cache. What does it say? Like the cache was the message. Quite remember what my obnoxious console log was saying. Is it here? So, so sometimes when you're like debugging code, I think you go in kind of this whole strategy that was taken, just now was kind of like you start with what you want again, bubbling way back up, just trying to get this service-based setup, and that rather than set up the gateway, there's a way to just track what server's on what port so that you can then devise a front end based tool to like you sort of then can route requests on the front end to the service by name. And that, even with the gateway set up, you could still do local host requests. Like that would get you mileage until, let's say, you start getting into like, I don't know, payment or user databases, and you don't want the front end to have, access that's like directly to the service, maybe, or maybe you're fine with it. But the point is that that's one objective, and then getting the local proxy NGrok style connections going, because it's helpful to have this kind of DNS, and you want to do stuff when the server first comes online. And sometimes I look at work that I'm doing, and I certainly am guilty of overcomplicating it. Well, this is odd. Maybe it's not that odd. Let's see. Yep, that fixed it. So that was an instance of, okay, so like basically, like you can, when you're debugging code, and I might cap it just for the sake of time on a live stream, but the idea is that when you're debugging code, you start with like the high level thing that you're trying to do. I think something that I work on is overcomplicating code. So for instance, like there's always opportunities to like search for simpler ways to do things. So like I may have started out with this problem of because I know it'd be huge to have it when the server goes online, that you're able to then hook it on to NGrok like this. That'd be great. And I was trying to tie that to this on change event, which maybe is the wrong event. Maybe because on change, as it currently stands, will trigger anytime any server comes online. And what you really want is you want NGrok for the process that's currently running. You want it to establish an NGrok connection when it comes online. And that's also something that's like perfectly available. So that's one strategy of like separate out what you're trying to solve, and don't necessarily bog yourself down solving like a big complicated thing. I have done that so many times, and in terms of overcomplicating. But then the other angle of things is like sometimes just in the process of writing tests is like hygiene, as in the case right here. You discover things that are kind of weird. And that was arrived at by just dropping console logs. And this is maybe looking sort of better now. I think that this chdir, this is just because the test wrapper, which is fine, it's trying to write a cache for the test directory. So this is like the only error messages remaining. It's kind of like this is related to being in a test environment. This is related to that as well. But again, I mean, it's like you drop in some console logs, or if you have a debug set up, you set up your debugger, add some breakpoints, and you kind of figure out what's going on. You look for discrepancies, and as you find an issue, you just try out different theories. And in this case, the thing I'm kind of drilling into and not yet mentioning is that the culprit was this watch cache file, which was like last time I probably touched this section of code. This is probably the most recent thing I had added, and I hadn't had tests on it. So what I didn't think of was that this maybe worked fine when you were like running one server. You could test like, okay, great, I can like run a server and then take the server offline and watch the cache come and go. But because I had recently added, since I last had touched the code, which was months ago, this ability to start an external server, that did not have this test coverage. And so the issue became that it was just writing a blank cache whenever a new process started up, which is not desired. All right, I'm going to cut it there. I am still going to figure out the right format, the right kind of timelining, the right times to get into code. I think an hour is about anybody is ever going to be able to stand in code land. I think it'll probably be more exciting to drop updates in between live streams, and then as I try to just gain my own regular habit of doing this, try to let people know that I'm doing this, so people, you can feel free to ask questions even after the fact, and I'll try to answer them. And if there's anything else I'm forgetting, let me know that I'm forgetting that. And